It's time for the Bible Geek. I am that geek. Robert M. Price, postmodern, deconstruct, super-powered demigod. Welcome to the Bible Geek with your host, Robert M. Price, podcasting from deep in the vaults of Yovombus, a Clark Ashton Smith reference. You needn't worry about it if you're not a Smith fan. But at any rate, that's where I've moved my equipment, so that's where we're doing the show. Okay, let me just shamelessly push the two books I have left for sale if you want an autographed copy. One is that massive symposium by me and loads of other folks, Acharya S., Frank Zindler, Richard Carrier, and others, called Bart Ehrman and the Quest of the Historical Jesus of Nazareth. And my own book, all me, The Historical Be-Jesus, What a Long, Strange Quest It's Been. $15 a piece. Let me know if you want them. You can pay for them on PayPal. Make sure you include your address. Okay, how about some questions? This from Ward Thomas. Greetings to the geek and his geekdom. Gotta enjoy a show which covers topics as great as the fullness of the pleroma and as small as how many angels can dance on the head of a pin. I enjoyed the discussion in the June 20th podcast, and indeed you were right on point regarding Thomas Aquinas, who addresses a question, a like question in Summa Theologica, Treatise on Angels, question 52, the angels in relation to place, Article 3, whether several angels can be at the same time in the same place. He reasons in Articles 1 and 2 that although an angel is incorporeal, the angel nevertheless occupies a space and does not have the unlimited power of God, and thus can be in only one place at a time. Aquinas reasons in Article 3, there are not the two angels in the same place. The reason of this is because it is impossible for two complete causes to be the causes immediately of one and the same thing. This is evident in every class of causes, for there is one proximate form of one thing, and there is one proximate mover, although there may be several remote movers. Nor can it be objected that several individuals may row a boat, since no one of them is a perfect mover, because no one man's strength is sufficient for moving the boat, while all together are as one mover, insofar as their united strengths all combine in producing the one movement. Hence, since the angel is said to be in one place by the fact that his power touches the place immediately by way of a perfect container, as was said, there can be but one angel in one place. Not to put too fine a point on it, if I understand the good schoolman correctly, he would say that angels each have their own spot on the dance floor. Not that they couldn't all jam in together, but that there would be no point in doing so. Next question, how many camels can squeeze through the eye of a needle? Thanks, Ward. I knew I'd seen something like that on Aquinas, but it's been a long time. Thanks for clarifying. Brent in Tennessee says, I've always believed that predestination was a synthesis between Christianity and European paganism's belief in fate. My understanding is that as Christianity spread westward, it adapted pagan practices into Christianity, and predestiny was just another case of this phenomenon. On your June 24th podcast, you said something in passing that led me to believe that you think differently. Could you expound on your beliefs in Christian predestination? My thinking is that you do find it in Romans, in the section on the fate of Israel in Romans chapters 9 through 11. I think there are 3 different sections in that, obviously there's 9, 10, and 11, right? But that's not what I mean. That there is a passage in there about the relative fates of Israel and the Gentiles, both leading to salvation, but in a different order. And there's another one on a related theme. And then there's a section about individuals' destinies being determined in advance, like the thing with, quoted it from Malachi, I think, is it? Or is it, maybe it's Micah. Jacob have I loved and Esau I have hated. That whole section really sounds like it is dealing with God's choice before anybody did anything of people to be saved and to be lost. And even if that is not the author's intent, I think it is, but even if it isn't, you can certainly see how St. Augustine and others read it that way, and I think that would be enough now to get the idea. You do have various interpretations, like how far do you want to take it? Does God choose the saved and merely pass over the reprobate? Does he just not save them? They've already seen to their own damnation, and some he rescues, others he doesn't. Both Augustine and later Calvin, following in his footsteps, independently thought the matter out, and both first thought, yeah, God just chooses some, leaves the others, but they both came to the conclusion that, gee, that doesn't really work. He must have decided who's going to be saved and who's going to be damned. And then, of course, you had other refinements trying to make God look a little better. You know, why the heck would he create the vast majority of people just to have them suffer in hell? It seems a little crazy. And then there are others that say, like Arminians say, that he doesn't pre-choose any individual. And they like to focus on Ephesians, where it speaks of a collective election of the church, and the point seems to be not that he's chosen individuals to be saved, but he has made the choice that only those who are in Christ will be saved. Now, does he choose who's going to be in Christ? Well, no, not necessarily. That seems to be up to the individual. So there are different views of this. Some try to reduce predestination to mere foreknowledge, because in Romans, a different passage, it says that those whom he foreknew, he also predestined to become conformed to the image of his Son, etc. That sounds like, at least to some theologians, and they have a point, that God's predestining, presumably his prearrangement of things, so they come out the way he wants, is predicated on knowing who is likely to choose given the chance. That's not an unreasonable reason. That's a terrible tautology. That's not an unreasonable inference, I should say. But then you, is that all predestined means? Well, yeah, it could be that he has, he knows ahead of time who would be saved. Of course, that's not really knowing ahead, right? That seems to know in advance what is going to happen. And so what is he predestining if it's already going to happen? I mean, is he bound to predestine, to arrange what he knows will happen as if he's not the one who made it happen? It just seems to be tied in knots. Excuse me. Plus, if you say, if you look at like Genesis 18, to know sometimes in the Bible means to have chosen. Abraham alone have I known, so I should reveal my plan to him. Well, he means chosen. I mean, God doesn't know everybody in our sense. So sometimes it just means I don't. That just means choosing. But in that case, it's redundant. Those he foreknew. If that means chose in advance, then he predestined them. Well, maybe it's redundant, maybe it's not, if the predestining just means prearranging, but then we get into the problem I just mentioned all over again. So I think it really is a mess. But I doubt that it was borrowed from the notion of fate. There's an interesting discussion of that in E.R. Dodd's, D-O-D-D-S, Pagan and Christian in an Age of Anxiety. Christianity was a big alternative to astrology because that implied an unalterable fate, and Christ defeats the powers. A good book on that is Hendrikus Berkhoff, Christ and the Powers. Okay, but another theological factor that enters into this is, what do we mean by omnipotence? If God is all-powerful, does that mean he could do anything he wanted to, but doesn't do it necessarily, not every time, for some good reason? Or does it mean that he is the only cause? Does all-powerfulness, does omnipotence mean omnicausality? If God causes only some things, does that mean somebody else is causing other ones? Then we're headed toward Manichaean dualism. That's you can. I don't know that the Bible writers thought this out in these details, but other theologians have. Like Tillich says, there are certain metaphysical questions raised by the Bible, almost inadvertently, that it does not answer, and that we're left to answer. Some have said that Augustine, who I think is the first one who systematically worked out any sort of predestination doctrine, Augustine had been a Manichaean Gnostic, and they believed in predetermination, and that he may have just borrowed it, brought it over from there. I suppose that's possible, but I don't think it's a necessary hypothesis. It seems to me it's quite an adequate explanation to look at the passages he discusses in connection with this. It seems to me he did just reason from the text and so forth. I have a huge problem with predestination, though, in that it seems to me to make nonsense of itself, and not only in the ways I just described, but it's like, it seems to me that it's this knowing the future thing. If you know it and can evade it, was it the future? Were you knowing the future, or only an alternative timeline, as they say in science fiction? What the heck's going on there? Well, if God is the cause of everything, and the whole of human history is one big novel that God is writing, why wouldn't it be like a human novel where the characters exist on a completely different level than the author does? Right? They're less real in a sense than he is. They're not living people, though they're real characters, right? They seem real. And they don't know that there's an author, much less that the author has determined what they're going to do. They think they're doing it. And it would seem to me that if there were predestination, nobody would know about it, because if you do, it's like the author is coming on stage in the middle of the play and saying, look, I've changed my mind. I want you to do this instead of that. And that just seems ridiculous to me. Where does it ultimately come from? Well, Benjamin Warfield, I think, put his finger on this. He said, look, you can call it predestination or Calvinism or whatever, but it really is simply the experience of piety. The pious person does not pat himself on the back and say, what a good boy am I. If he took credit, even if theoretically he deserved the credit, that would tempt him into self-satisfaction and pride. So the pious attitude is a humble attitude that claims nothing for itself but thanks God. Well, think about that. Doesn't that imply that that you are doing what you are doing by the grace of God, that really he's doing it and you're the receiver of your actions, not the originator of them? Well, that's an interesting point. That probably is where it comes from ultimately, psychologically. Of course, whether that's a valid inference is another matter. Not every righteous person thinks of it that way. So, good question. Hope that's an answer. There is a fascinating book that argues against predestination. I guess the authors are Arminians. Right, that's a theological approach, not Armenian, which is a noble ethnic people, also an Armenian church, but I mean, Protestant Arminians. The last names are Forster and Marston. I think it's Forster and Marston. It could be Don, but I think it's T. And, boy, what's the title? God's something and man's something. Oh boy, I thought I knew what it was. It's been decades since I. Oh boy, I don't know, but to see if you can find that. Is published in the UK, and I think Tyndale House in America reprinted it. God's something and man's responsibility, I believe. I'll see if I can look it up, but also a good book, without wading into the depths of this thing, that's pro-predestination, is J.I. Packer, Evangelism and the Sovereignty of God. So there's a good couple of books to get both sides on that. Yeah, boy, oh man, maybe I can get that Forster and Marston thing next time, boy. Okay. From Dr. Barton, this is an interesting one, of course. He's a good Bible theorizer. While reading early on in The Death and Resurrection of the Beloved Son, the Transformation of Child Sacrifice in Judaism and Christianity by John D. Levinson, Levenson. So far, quite an interesting exploration of ancient Hebraic human sacrifice. I came across an interesting passage from Eusebius of Caesarea in Preparato Evangelia, book 4, chapter 16, channeling Philo, channeling, I don't know if I can even pronounce this, Sanchuniathon's Phoenician history. For Kronos, whom the Phoenicians call Il, or El, or Elis, and who after his death was deified and instated in the planet which bears his name, when the king had by a nymph of the country called Anobret an only son, who on that account is styled Iud, that's most of the vowels, I-E-O-U-D, or Iadud, I-A-D-O-U-D, for so the Phoenicians still call him, and his only son. When great dangers from war beset the land, Kronos adorned the altar, invested his son with the emblems of royalty, and sacrificed him. Although the equating of the Phoenician and therefore Canaanite El with Kronos is interesting, I found an offshoot thought from this passage even more interesting. Iud or Iadud may or may not equate with Yahweh. Since it probably does, this provides additional, though minor, evidence that Yahweh was originally seen as the son of El. Why is this interesting? We already know that El refers to the same Canaanite Hebraic god, which makes the same one. They're talking about the same one, which makes Yahweh and Baal, or as I propose, Bar El, son of El, equivalent or brother gods. We know that they both fought the chaos gods and overcame them. As a result of that battle, El stepped down from his throne, and Baal took over as king of the gods. No such equivalent story seems to have survived the Judaic monotheistic purges of the Bible texts, but I feel confident it was there at one time. By the way, let me pause and suggest I think we do have something like that in Daniel 7, in his vision of the one like a son of man, who defeats these hybrid chimera monsters that arise from the ocean. And then he takes his seat beside El Elyon, the god ancient in days, and he's given dominion over all peoples. I think that is the passing of the torch. Okay, anyway, one of the important challenges for Baal was battling Mot, M-O-T, the god of death, for kingship of the Elohim, the gods. It was a battle that he lost and died in. Later, Baal's sister, Anat, fought Baal with such similarly worded passages. I think you mean fought Mot, right? With such similarly worded passages, that is, to the ones describing Baal's battle, that one may wonder if Baal changed sexes, but that is grist for another discussion. I mean, is it still describing the same person, the same divine warrior? Anat won. Baal somehow returned to life and took over kingship of the Elohim. Here's the structure of the epic. The Elohim are presumably threatened by Mot, death. El is ready to surrender when Baal steps up. El invests Baal with authority to fight in his name. Baal and Mot fight. Baal dies. Mot is defeated. I will concede several points of interpretation in the above summary, but bear with me. Now replace or supplement the investment stage with El sacrifices Baal. Theologically speaking, the gap between Baal sacrificing himself on an altar and on the field of battle is quite small, especially when one has to consider the altar as a gateway to the god being sacrificed to. Thus, I would contend that it is possible that in the original Hebraic version of Yahweh overcoming death and the chaos gods, it is entirely possible that he was sacrificed to send him to the underworld to battle. From here we can see a possible way in which a survival of cultic Judaism could have influenced the Jesus sacrifice story, as Dr. Margaret Barker has suggested, that originally Jesus was Yahweh. Mostly I found the idea fascinating that in the minds of ancient Middle Easterners there could be such a small gap between death on the battlefield and death in human sacrifice. Have you any thoughts to add to this idea? Well, somebody who dies nobly in battle is said to have sacrificed himself. You could have identified a kind of tacit missing link. That wouldn't be too out of order. It makes some sense to me. It's speculation, but nothing wrong with that. Let's see. As Geo Wiedengren pointed out, there's at least one psalm that seems to presuppose and to ritually repeat the death of Yahweh and the appeal for him to rise. And the one that says Yahweh lives, and that implies, just like it says Elyon Baal lives, or the Attis cult, rejoice you of the mystery, your God lives. And so he was resurrected. Marduk was apparently devoured by Tiamat, but fought his way out and rose from the dead. So the resurrection of the god appears to be part of the ancient royal mythology, the god whose vicar the king is, and whose victory he repeats every New Year's festival, dies and rises as part of his defeat of the Chaos Dragon. Yeah, you gotta write this up, Doc. Commander Scotty from the Ann Arbor Galaxy. Are there places in either the Old or the New Testaments that state directly that the texts therein are intended to be historical and should be read as such? On the other hand, does one encounter statements to the effect that the texts are more literary in nature, that is, not historical, or are issues such as these never raised directly? If the latter, then how can one be sure how to read the Old and New Testaments? Well, you can't really, and part of that is that that historical fiction is a very old genre. There are ancient novels going back to, I think, the 7th century BCE that are all dressed up in known historical events and peppered with the names of real kings and all that. But like our historical novels, they really are not historically based. It's a kind of a what if. Even if it says in the beginning, as it does in Luke, well, I've checked all this out. Well, there are other cases of stuff like that in the Hellenistic novels. You may wonder how I know about this, but I was looking at a tapestry in a temple, and an old guy came up to me and said, I see you looking at that. You know, it's based on the facts, and here they are. Well, they weren't, and he wasn't really trying to pull the wool over your eyes. In fact, this kind of convention survives today in the movie, Fargo, or as I like to say, Fargo, where I'm not talking about the TV series, but rather the movie. It says, well, I guess the TV show says this too, right? That these events are real. We've just changed the names. No, they're not. The Coen brothers, who wrote it, admitted that this is just a kind of a prank. They made the whole thing up. Well, it's not exactly a deceptive. It's not exactly a prank. It's just a genre marker. It's an as-if kind of a thing. It's an attempt to increase verisimilitude. They're not making any money out of tricking somebody into buying the Everglades or the Brooklyn Bridge, right? It's just part of a genre. That, yes, it's true crime. And true crime may be fiction. And the same thing here. So there are statements in narrative parts of the Bible, later ones, admittedly, like Samuel and Kings, where it says, now, if you want to read more about this, you can go check out of your library the book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Israel and stuff like that. There are a few references like that, which certainly seems to mean you're reading history here, though the tip of the iceberg, and you can read more elsewhere. But nobody really knows. Scholars doubt as to whether those things are real source materials, or if that's, again, part of the shtick. So, I mean, it really makes sense either way. I don't think we can be too certain. Now, some have suggested that in the case of a blatant anachronism, the author may know the reader is going to know something is wrong here, and it's a wink to the reader. Like, what is it? Judith, the book of Judith in the Apocrypha, or is it Tobit? I forget offhand, where it says that that Nebuchadnezzar was currently the emperor of Assyria. He wasn't an Assyrian; he was a Babylonian. Anybody would have known that. So, my professor Ramsey Michaels at Gordon Conwell said this has to be a wink to the reader. Could well be, but you can't be sure because sometimes there are howlers, just incredible errors in some of these books that, I mean, look at the unbelievable ignorance of history today. Well, people were much less educated back then, if that's possible. So it really is tough to say. And that alone might mean that people's worries could be assuaged if you start saying, well, it says this, but it didn't really happen. If they say, well, wait a minute, you're saying the Bible's just mistaken or worse, dishonest? Not necessarily. We don't. It's hard to know exactly what the author intended. We're trying our best to reconstruct it so we can understand the text better, but there's no way to know. And especially if well, I'll tell you one thing that tells us when something is not historical is where you can compare the source with the revised version, like when you can compare Samuel and Kings on the one hand to Chronicles on the other. Chronicles is a tendentious rewrite. They inflate statistics, they add miracles and all that. And there you can see, I think Mark Svi Bretler takes this approach in, I wish I could think of the name of the book. I get some of the minimalist works mixed up through superficial familiarity. something about history writing, or the making of ancient Israel. I forget, but he says, look at the way these guys handled the sources when we can verify it. They can't have been thinking they were writing history. I mean, they could be hoaxing, but there's no reason to assume that. They apparently thought it was a piece of fiction, edifying, that was malleable, or at least what they were writing on the basis of this older material was pious fiction. So look at the way, this is what got Bart Ehrman to reject inerrancy and eventually inspiration, when he started comparing the synoptic gospels. And he said, look, there's no way this is simply reporting. It's obvious these people felt free to change what they received. And if that's the case with Matthew and Luke using Mark, who the heck knows what Mark changed? Or the people before him? Yeah, very good point. So the way in which they change it, when we can trace that, shows that they were not necessarily trying to record what they thought happened. My favorite example of this, it's a tiny one. When Mark, followed by Luke, has Jesus say that anyone who divorces his wife so that she marries another is committing adultery against her. But Matthew has anyone who divorces his wife other than for the sake of porneia, immorality somehow defined, etc., etc. Jesus didn't say both, right? Somebody has done some tampering, and it's pretty obvious what happened. Matthew has decided to add an exception in there to restore the viewpoint of Deuteronomy that, well, yeah, you can get divorced legitimately. God doesn't mind if it's the reaction to infidelity. Well, did Matthew think he was, boy, this is going to be great. I can pull the wool over their eyes. I'm going to trick them into thinking Jesus said this. No. No, the Gospel of Mark has become a kind of a legal authority in his community, but it's time to update it. Things have changed and problems have surfaced, and he figures that he needs to readjust the text, like amending the Constitution. He's not thinking of whether this is historical or not. It's not a question of that. And so it may be elsewhere, though it is very difficult to tell. I mean, I've had students who thought the parables of Jesus were meant to be literal historical descriptions. Oh, man. Hi, boy. Okay, this is, oh boy, is this fascinating. I didn't know this. This is from John Tusick, who lives near Chicago. I was just listening to the Bible Geek episode 14036 in your discussion of Melchizedek, Abraham, and El Elyon. The Masoretic text, the Genesis 14:22, as Abraham's statement equate El Elyon with Yahweh, but neither the Septuagint nor the Dead Sea Scrolls includes the critical word Yahweh. I take that to mean that Abraham was originally raising his hand to El Elyon, and that Yahweh was sort of a private deity for Abe at this point in the narrative. The Masoretes, or someone later than the 2nd century BCE anyway, decided that this was unacceptable and clarified Abraham's quote to show that El Elyon is just another name for the one true God, Yahweh. But Abram said to the king of Sodom, that would be a good one for Abraham. Anyway, I raised my hand to the Lord, the Most High, all caps, the Most High, the possessor of heaven and earth. The Orthodox Study Bible, the translation of the Septuagint, says, but Abraham said to the king of Sodom, I've raised my hand to God Most High, creator of heaven and earth. The complete Dead Sea Scrolls in English by Geza Vermesh. Then said Abram to the king of Sodom, I raise my hand this day to the Most High God, Lord of heaven and earth. Boy, that is fascinating. This fusion of the two gods which Margaret Barker said was part of the Deuteronomic theological revision agenda. I assumed that it took place way back there in the whenever this passage was composed. I mean, this war of the kings in Genesis 14. I think there's a long-standing problem with what source it comes from. But at any rate, I figured, this is an attempt to say that Yahweh and El Elyon are the same. But from what you say, it certainly appears that is incorrect, that is why it reads the way it does now, but that it was some much later scribe who decided to make the link. Not that they hadn't made the link generally in Judaism beforehand, as Margaret Barker suggests, but that this passage is a later reflection of it. Thank you, John. That is really great to know. I think I better get it going today. I've got some other recording to do. I hopefully will get back. I'm working on a couple of books now, and it's difficult to squeeze everything in. I'm working on this book tentatively titled Blaming Jesus for Jehovah, and also on a book called Holy Fable. I've finished the draft of the first section on Genesis, which is already about nearly 50 single-space pages, so this may be a fat book. Even that's a scandalously skimpy treatment of a masterpiece like Genesis. But I hope, as I say, to get back to you pretty soon. And in the meantime, keep sending in those questions. I do have loads, but I go through them pretty quick once I actually get to them. So, and once again, I hate to ask this, if you can help support the old Bible Geek and his family, we could sure use it. If not, don't worry about it. I'll see you soon anyway.
The Bible Geek was recorded by Robert M. Price and produced by John Felix and Sergeant Jovanovich. Theme song by John Morris. Visit us at robertmprice.mindvendor.com for more info on Robert's projects, purchase Bible Geek merchandise, and click the ever-important Donate button. Send your questions to criticus@aol.com, and be sure to rate and review The Bible Geek on iTunes. Thanks for listening to The Bible Geek. I'm Torrin Atkinson.